So Vanessa, first of all, thank you so much for making the time and joining me. You're in New York.
Yes.
And I'm in San Francisco. So first things first, I just want to start with just some of the basics. I would love for you to just introduce yourself and just kind of tell us a little bit about you and as well as your podcast. Just right out the gate, the thing that jumped out to me obviously is the name of your podcast. Like right out the gate, like as soon as I saw that, like I was like, oh, I love it. I love the word thrive and I love spice. It's like,
Oh, yeah.
I was like, I feel like she's like one of us, and then we connected. And then like, as soon as we had our first conversation, it was just so easy and natural. And then I found out that you were a Leo too. And I was like, oh my God, of course, so the whole thing, it's just been such a pleasure to connect with you. And of course, like I'm always super excited to not only meet another Leo, but I'm also always excited to meet other Asian American women who are just like doing things, like just trying to step out of their comfort zones, while still trying to like live our best lives and like honor our family's wishes and be the best daughter, wife, mother version of ourselves possible.
Yes.
Like so much pressure.
Exactly.
But it's just so nice to just connect with folks that are just doing it and then also trying to help share the stories of other people who are doing it as well. So yes, that's like Vanessa, I would love for you to just kind of take the mic from here and just tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Lillian, for having me here on your live session today. I'm so excited and super grateful that you also spent time talking to me on the podcast. We just released the episode today about really bossing up and being the CEO of your own life. So my name is Vanessa Shiliwala. I am Chinese and Taiwanese American. My parents immigrated here from Taiwan and Hong Kong. And they came to Wisconsin where there weren't a ton of other Asian folks around. So grew up in a very non-diverse place. And I ended up moving to New York City to really kind of get away from that and went to NYU, studied communications, and ended up working in marketing for over a decade, mainly in the beauty industry. And I also, along the way, got married. My husband is Indian American, also first generation. We have two crazy toddlers together who really keep us on our toes. So I went through a lot of life changes, especially like in the last 5 years. So particularly after I had my first daughter, I just kind of like, I was working hard and I had this personal goal of being like director of marketing by 30. And then I got there at 29 and I was like, is this it? I was like, I don't I don't really feel that different. I don't feel like all of a sudden all of my happiness is overflowing or anything. And I really thought to myself, well, something is missing. And a couple of years after that, I had my first daughter and I thought to myself, I think it's time for a change. And I decided to kind of step out of the workforce, spend her first year at home with her to really lean into being a stay-at-home mom for a year. And it was the most difficult job I'd ever had in my life. Like the no sleep on 24/7, you're Googling everything because you're just like, oh my God, I'm doing this wrong. Or you're asking Alexa, you're like, Alexa, is this normal? Or calling your doctor asking, is this normal? And the answer is like 99% of the time, like, yes, it's normal. This is like,
I love everything that you've already shared just in the first minutes, because I think it was like Monday, I was having my weekly coaching call with my members inside the practice container. And I was asking my clients, like, oh, how's your weekend? How you feeling? And Susie was like, I'm fucking poop. Like, I don't know how parents do it. Like, apparently, like she spent like all day or the weekend or something like that, like with her nieces and nephews, like it's two of them. And she's like, what the fuck? Like, how did you do this? She's like, this shit is so hard. It's so exhausting.
It's so hard. It's called the adult power nap. And like mom groups, like that's how we do it. But for real, it was the hardest job I'd ever had. And I was like, I found myself actually going through postpartum depression. And I was like, what is going on? So I went to go see a therapist. I tried to figure out how to really manage through that. And I learned a lot about myself and, why it was so hard to kind of leave this career identity I'd crafted for myself and then really lean into being a mom and in that whole world. And that was a really difficult transition for me. But I also think it was a huge blessing because it allowed me to really examine like what really matters to me. And when I was pregnant with my girl, I was thinking, do I really want to be part of this machine in the beauty industry that keeps telling women that they're not enough?
Mm.
And I wanted my girl to grow up in a world where she felt enough just as she was, that her skin color when she came out of the womb was perfect and that she didn't need to change it. I wanted to send the message to young women of how to live at their full worth, how to embrace themselves, how to love themselves. So that was one thing I realized. And
Wow.
then the second was I was like, well, let me take this moment, this pause, to really think about things that are important to me. So one of them was entrepreneurship. So I actually enrolled myself in a startup accelerator program. I applied and got in here in New York and learned a lot about lean startup principles. But I think two things were huge takeaways from that. One was just getting to talk to a lot of different people who were in the same kind of headspace, trying to pivot into something new, trying to learn something, really pushing themselves out of their comfort zone. But also I learned how to talk about my life story and figure out how I was going to align with my core values. That was really the most important lesson. You write down your core values, you figure out, okay, how can I live in alignment with my core values? What would I do for free? And how can I manifest that? So I initially went in thinking that I was going to do something around sustainability because that's always been an interest of mine. And I was taking a course in sustainability from the New School. And the more I learned about it, the more I discovered that sustainability is actually about making the world a better place for the next 7 generations.
Right.
So yes, go plastic free and all that, but it really has a much bigger impact than just materials. And it also affects communities of color way more than it does with just, regular white folks. So around the same time, the Stop Asian Hate report came out about all of the hate crimes against Asian folks and particularly elders. And it just really hurt me. And the Atlanta spa shooting happened. And I literally found myself like struggling to feel comfortable to go into a grocery store or public places for a couple weeks. And it really affected my mental health. And the more that I talked about this with some of my friends in the community, the more they also said, you know what, me too. Like, it's been really hard dealing with hearing about all this trauma. It's kind of reigniting a lot of racial PTSD and racial trauma that we've had, intergenerational trauma. And, as an Asian woman, we tend to kind of bring like 100 people with us into the room wherever we go, because we're holding that trauma from so many generations before us, after us, you name it. And we're holding it and we haven't had an outlet to really talk about it. And so I thought, okay, you know what? I need to create a safe space for us to just talk about this, because the more research I did on mental health with the Asian community, Asian Americans in particular, I saw that Asian Americans are actually 3 times less likely than white people to get help for mental health issues. Young Asian American women between the ages of 15 and 24 are the #1 racial group to die by suicide. And Asian men in that same group are #2. And that's a huge problem. People are literally losing their lives because there's so many barriers to seeking help and talking about it and normalizing the discussion around it. And so I thought, okay, well, what's a sustainable thing to do? It's actually to create a space to do that. And so that's how Thrive Spice was born. And the name is kind of funny because I like to cook a lot. So one of my favorite spices is Five Spice, which is kind of this like uniquely, like kind of ABC, like Chinese American kind of spice. It's like a little American, a little Asian. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to just take that and kind of change it around and be like, here's that secret sauce to survival. It's Thrive Spice.
I don't think I realized that that's where that came from.
Yeah.
I forgot, but like hearing it again, I'm like, oh my God, I love it.
Yeah. And yeah, like to your point earlier, it's a little bit about that like spice, right? Like, because I think as Asian Americans, we've been kind of stereotyped into the minority myth of being like quiet and hardworking and everything. And while I was at one of the companies that I worked at, I was also president of the Asian network there, which was their diversity and inclusion group. And we held a lot of speaker panels on trying to gain career succession for Asian Americans in the organization, and having, senior leadership really kind of sponsor that whole trail. And it was really difficult. And I feel like the conversations that we were having then, we're still having them today. And that's a
No.
problem, right? So I thought that it was a perfect opportunity to really try to create that space where we can talk about it, everything from the bamboo ceiling to model minority myth to depression and anxiety, just make it normal and just talk about it in a real way. And I also wanted to interview people who are really successful in their own right, but also show that a lot of the people who are the most successful, they actually have had the most mental health struggles because they continue to push themselves both externally and internally, right? So we have external situations, and then internally, because a lot of us are like first generation, like children of immigrants, or we're women of color, like we just always have that extra baggage that we're trying to process, and there just haven't been as many resources out there to help us through it. So I'm really trying to be very like Asian American centric and really focused on women of color, particularly moms, especially because I know that struggle is real, and just to celebrate, not only the mess and the grit, but also the joy and the resilience of our community, because we are stronger together. So this was like literally a little over 6 months ago. So it's been a short but wild ride so far. And I've met some really incredible people. So I'm very grateful for that.
Girl, we are just so on the same page about so many things, and I just love everything that you're sharing and saying, because, everything that you're saying about, yes, like how Asian Americans are, 3 times less likely, like that's a huge
Yeah.
number, right? Like highest suicide rate, like, yes, exactly. Like being Korean American, like Koreans have the highest suicide rate in the world. Like that, like I care about that shit,
Yeah.
and how do we change the trajectory for that? It's like, okay, well, like I may not be able to like literally change it like in this quantity right now, but like we can just start with what's right in front of us.
Yeah.
And I love what you're saying about creating safe spaces, because that's everything, right?
Yeah.
Everything that you said about sustainability and yes, of course, like go plastic free, but it's like, it's bigger than that, right?
Yeah, totally.
What that actually really means, what that actually means to like create sustainability for the next many generations, then creating that safe space. And then how do you create that safe space? I love all this because we're talking about how to hold space in our coaching calls this week. So all of this week, we have 2 coaching calls a week, and we're literally talking about how to hold space. What does that actually mean? What is the opposite of that? And why is that even so important in the first place? And you're literally touching on all of those things. So like our alignment right now is on fire. So much of the reason why we need to hold space for this, everything that you said, is exactly right. I mean, a lot of our traumas, and I know that the T word can seem kind of scary, but they can be big T's, small T's, micro T's, everything in between. A lot of that comes from us just not having the space, to be and to share our stories and have a place to like share, unpack, and do all these things. So I love that that's where your natural intuition and your study and self-study and all that, like I love that that's where it took you to, and that's just beautiful. I just love that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of it's just about like almost like community or collective healing. Like we're all going through some shit right now, and especially the pandemic that really showed us that there's a lot of suffering and pain, and it's tough right now. But I think the beauty of that is that it really allowed us to have this moment where we came together and organized, and we were like, oh, actually, we do need to create some space for this. And, my message, in regards to suicide is you are not alone. We are all experiencing some degree of pain. There's a lot going on in the world right now. And I think that particularly for our generation, in our age group, we're kind of in the sandwich generation. We have like younger kids or other people we're taking care of. And then we're also kind of all starting to take care of our parents or, older family. And so it's really hard to find time for ourselves. But what I had to learn the hard way as a mom was like, if I don't make time for myself, everyone suffers, not just myself, my kids, my husband, the people around me. I can't be my best self if I don't take care of myself. And I think it's a real clash with like previous generations where the role of mom was like very sacrificial. She gave up everything. And especially in immigrant communities, we see this a lot where the immigrant mom, we know this story, she gives up everything. And there is merit in that. And I'm not knocking that. It's also a privilege, right? We've had the privilege of higher education, opportunity as, American born. So we have opportunities, but at the same time, being asked to do what was expected of that previous generation in a totally different time, in totally different circumstances, it's not realistic and it's not healthy. So that was just something I had to learn the hard way.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I mean, you are a mom of two. How old are you have two daughters, right?
Yeah. So I have a almost 2-year-old and I have a 3.5-year-old. So they're at like peak
Madness in your house.
crazy like age, like everything is a negotiation. I will tell you, like becoming a mom, like you know how to run a tight ship and you know how to like negotiate. Like my husband and I, we joke kind of, well, it's not that funny, but we're like, our toddlers are terrorists because and we're like, are we going to negotiate with terrorists today? And sadly, yes, we do. We do negotiate with them every day. But, also just learning and unlearning a lot of parenting techniques that we've learned as kids, particularly, our parents' generation, they had very different ideas about how to raise kids, and, positive parenting was not a thing. So, I've gotten feedback like, oh, you're complimenting your daughter too much. And like, what's she going to amount to? And I'm like, I'm actually really happy with where she is right now. And like, all the Asian parents, now grandparents, are like, oh my God, like that's not a real answer. Like, that's not okay.
Oh my God, that is so funny. Yeah, that must be a trip to like see that like juxtaposition, that's crazy. So I love that. So they're like 2.5, like 2, 3. There must be absolute madness in your house.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
But even with that said, like, you've got to do so much negotiation. It's so much madness in the house. And you were saying like, if you don't get taken care of, like nobody gets taken care of.
Oh,
So
yeah. Yeah.
being in the phase that you're in right now, we have a handful of moms in our community with children your age as well. So like, I'm sure they're just like, yes, girl, Terrace, I get that, What has been like your like absolute non-negotiables for you that have been like, I have to absolutely give this to myself or else I'm going to repeat the same generational trauma with my kids?
Yes. So it's been the hardest lesson to learn, but really giving myself time and really time to be and do the things that make me feel whole. So, my old kind of thinking was like, okay, the more I sacrifice for my family, the more they're going to love me. And I was so wrong about that. So wrong. And I still find myself slipping into that sometimes. Like it's a real slippery slope. You're like, oh my gosh, if I cook like 3 extra meals this week, like they're going to love me. Nope. Guess what? That meal's going to end up on the floor because I have toddlers. And the first thing they do when they see food is they throw it on the floor. So it's like, so can't measure your love in that. And I think it's just like carving out space. For me, mental health is really about like, you go into a bar, right? Like everyone has a different drink they want to order, right? Because through years of trying different things, you're like, okay, I want a martini, I want a beer, I want a glass of wine. So it's different for everyone in terms of like what fills their cup, quite literally in terms of their mental health and self-care. So for me, it was a combination of like a couple years of therapy. I still go. It's kind of like my weekly like tune up in terms of just kind of processing all the stuff that I went through that week, and really having someone who's a licensed professional to talk about it in a safe space. And by the way, she's also an Asian woman. So I can't stress enough, it's really hard to find a therapist who kind of understands your cultural background, but it's so important for some people because you don't want to have to like translate half your life for your therapist every time, or like bring a PowerPoint deck every time you're like, this is what it's like in Asian culture. So like she gets it.
So many times, by the way, like it's a real thing. Like I've heard it so many times from clients coming to me where they're like, I found myself having to like explain, and then they're like, at a certain point, it's like, okay, like I'm literally spending half of my session just giving.
And they're like, your time is up. I now kind of understand on the surface level what Asian culture is like. You're like, but I still need help. So so definitely finding a great therapist, and then also the physical part, right? So I've tried a lot of things over the years. I used to do like sprint triathlons. I used to be like a competitive runner and swimmer. And then, you enter adulthood and career and mom life, and you're like, I don't have time for any of these things. So it's just kind of figuring out physical activity. I recently tried stand-up paddleboarding yoga, loved it. I've been back like 4 times in the last month. So it just really gives me a lot of peace because because it's basically like doing yoga on like a floating yoga mat, which is your paddleboard. And like, it's kind of a mind trip at first. You're like, oh my God, my mat is moving. But once you literally go with the flow, like you start to really relax and you realize like that is life. Like just literally your yoga mat is not straight ever. You just have to constantly adjust. And just when you think you're like cruising, it's like, bam, you could fall into the water. So that's been good just in kind of like centering me. So I think finding kind of physical practice, whether it's yoga or biking sometimes. And then I really think that finding good childcare is still really hard and still very important.
Yeah.
So we tried like everything. We had nanny, we had live-in nanny. Now the combination that seems to work well for us is we send our kids to daycare and they actually have full programming all day. They also do yoga, they have Spanish, they have music. I was like, school was not like this when I was growing up. Like it was just
I was like, damn,
playtime all day. Like it's very
I'd be a
structured.
totally different person if
Yeah,
that was
exactly. And I was like, I had to tell myself, because I had a lot of mom guilt about it, because I spent both of my daughter's first years at home with them, breastfeeding, the whole 9 yards, like sacrificial mom. And I really lost myself in the process. And so I had to tell myself like, okay, Vanessa, like they're actually better off in the school environment because they've got socialization, they have multiple teachers, they have structured activities. Like, do you really think you're going to like whip out the arts and crafts table at 2 p.m. every day, or like give them a yoga lesson or bring out a guitar and start singing? Like, no, you're not going to do that because you have so much other stuff to do as a mom. So I really had to kind of let go. And I think like the old person in me would have been like, oh, you're lowering your standards. But another thing I really had to learn was about positive self-talk, because I think I was trained from years of just growing up in the Asian American community to kind of like think about the negative self-talk, like, oh, how do I compare it to others? And what am I doing that's like not as good as somebody else? Or like, how would my parents criticize me even? So, it's really unlearning that. And so I would start to keep journals where I would write like something negative I thought about myself, like I'm a bad mom or something because I blew up at my kid. And then on the opposite side, I would write like, I'm actually a good mom because I help provide for them. I dress them in the mornings. I teach them, these lessons about morality and what's right and wrong, and teach them how to be independent. And they actually say they love me sometimes. Sometimes they also say to go away, but that's okay. That's normal. So it's just kind of like reframing and then embracing that like two things can be true at once, right? Like you can feel like you're not good enough, but you can also look at the other side of the coin and say, well, actually, here's what I am doing. And I think also just kind of, reframing that in terms of my own career, like, oh, I'm staying home as a mom, I'm like missing out, I'm falling behind or something. I was like, well, actually, here's what I've learned and here's what I've accomplished and here's what I'm doing. And, something that I heard from another guest on my podcast was that she was really like, when you're in the midst of a transition, you just need to keep showing up to this space that you're passionate about, right? And then things fall into place for you. And, opportunities open up. It's really this like plan of abundance. But as Asians, we have to learn to like let go a little bit. And that is so, so difficult. I'm still in the process of trying to like learn to do that. And I'm not going to lie, it's messy at times.
I love that. And I love what you shared about how you'll say like, you'll have this negative thought of like, oh, I'm a bad mom, but then you'll reframe that. And what you're describing there is what I teach all my clients, which is like a go-to tool for all of us, which is when you go into those places, it's not about positive thinking, which you did not say, which I appreciate, because it's not about positive thinking. It's actually about going to your truths. It's about going to the truth, right? So what we do instead of combating that negative talk, instead of going to positive talk, it's actually about going to the truth of the matter. The truth is that like I provide for my children. They tell me that they love me every now and again. Like I care about their well-being. I cook them a meal. I cook them a meal even after they threw it back in my face. Like, and I still got them dressed. It's like,
yeah, exactly.
That's the truth. So I love that you shared that, because that's exactly. It's so simple, but we forget that we can really quickly turn that around. It's almost so much easier to just kind of go into the self-loathing, deprecating place. Feels so familiar, and then
Yeah. I think it feels familiar and safe for some of us because we feel like, oh, if I criticize myself first, no one can criticize me. And it's almost like a defense mechanism. But then we don't realize, like, well, if I really own that awareness of myself and really own what I've accomplished, actually, like, people are going to see that and then things are going to come for me. So I think it was a really hard but important lesson to learn.
Love that. Rich is watching and he said, "Are y'all sure you haven't known each other before that you are on the same train of thought?" I'm like, I know it's not. I love when that happens. It's so good. So Vanessa, so I'm curious. I want to ask just a couple questions about your podcast specifically.
Yeah.
And then, we can slowly start to wrap up. So, I can't believe that your podcast is only 6 months old, to be honest, because I feel like you're in it, like just energetically. And I think this, once again, it just goes to show it doesn't really matter how long you've been doing something or like, or none of that vanity stuff really matters at the end of the day. It's like, you can feel energy, you can feel intention, you can feel heart that goes behind certain things. And so even with your podcast, like when you told me like it's only been around for 6 months, I was like, oh wow, like it feels very rich,
Thank you.
feels like, there's just been a lot of intention and richness that's gone into it so far. And so I guess, with that said, I'd love to hear it from your words. What, obviously you've told us what the intention is, but what has really been like your favorite thing that has come out of this process over these last 6 months so far? Like,
Yeah.
like your biggest like golden nugget or takeaway over this past 6 month journey?
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think that really the richness of the community has been my joy.
Oh,
And, some of them, some of these people I knew before, but actually most of them were strangers or they were people who were referred to me. And they're like all my children. Like, I feel very proud of them.
you're like talking just like me right now. Like, stop. It's like the longer we talk, it's like creeping me out. I'm like, literally how I talk about my containers. But sorry, didn't mean
Oh my gosh.
like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Hashtag adult babies, like the whole thing. Anyways, go on.
I always say, like, you can learn from anybody, and I still believe that, but these are not just anybody's, these are all somebody's. And I want to tell everyone here, like, you are somebody. And I think that's what's really inspirational about learning about anyone's journey, right? Like, everyone has been through something. And I think that with social media, like, we don't talk about it. We just give them the highlights. You're like, oh, so-and-so's going here. They're in Bali, they're in the Maldives, and, they're on their private jet. And no one's really talking about the gritty times. And I was like, you know what? We need to talk about that a little bit more, because I learned when I became a mom, and I learned through this podcast, like, when we open up and talk about this, like, there is so much richness that comes, and there's so much collective healing that happens. And someone may have thought they even like healed from it already, but healing is not linear. So, it's something that, okay, we reopen the wound, we take a look, we give it some compassion, we hear it out, we give it space. And then all of a sudden we're like, okay, I feel a little bit lighter. I can let this go now, and it may come back again, and that's okay. And so I think that was a really important lesson, just to see that, not only was I not alone, that everyone went through a lot of these similar feelings. And I think that's where that richness comes from. It's just the authenticity of, everyone's going through something, and everyone has struggled to feel seen or heard. And that pain is shared. It's a collective pain. And to be able to say, like, you know what, you can talk about it here, and we're going to welcome it, and we're going to get through it together. And I see you, and I see you in your journey. That is where the strength is. So I think just finding that community of like-minded people who just like, they all are actually quite different from each other, but they've all gone through something. And I think finding that healing together is really powerful, and holding space to talk about things that they might not have shared with anybody before. And then also removing that element of shame. Like, it's not something to be ashamed of, to be talking about something traumatic that happened to you. And that is something that I think is really new for our generation. Even if we have, gone to therapy or something, in a collective sense, it's more rare, right? Because we only want to like highlight the wins and everything. So I think that we literally just experience and go through things together. And I think that's where that nuance and that richness comes from.
I love that. Oh my gosh, it's crazy. Like I'm having such a Leo moment. I was like, am I listening to myself? Are we
Same braining, yeah.
so funny. I love it. It's just so wonderful to hear just your take on everything and to just hear it like, mirrored back and I'm so on the same page with you and it's just so beautiful and I'm so grateful. Honestly, I'm so grateful that you exist and that you get that and that you want to continue to expand and ripple that out because we just really do need that more than anything. Has there been an episode, I always ask this question, has there been like an episode or episodes that have done particularly well? And do you
Mhm.
see any common threads or common denominators in those?
Yeah. So one of the first couple episodes that I did, one of them was with Kimberly Lau, who's a good friend of mine that I know back in my days in the beauty industry. And she has had a long history of empowering other women, particularly Asian American women. She actually nominated me to be the president of the Asian Network. So we have this long history together, but she agreed to do the podcast interview. She was my second episode ever. She was super supportive. She also has her own business. It's called Bake Me Healthy, and it's like a baking subscription box. So when she came on the podcast, we had a couple of topics we wanted to cover, but she ended up actually sharing something that she had never even shared with her like personal friends and family before, and that was that she had survived a breast cancer scare. And she ended up kind of like breaking down a little bit on the podcast and showing her emotions, and we were like literally crying together because it was such a traumatic experience and we were processing it together as friends. And she also talked about positive parenting and how her parents, like, back then, just like every other Asian parent, they hit their kids. That was how you discipline your child. And nowadays, as now she's a parent of like relatively young children, trying to think about like what are some different ways I can parent them? How are some ways I can instill values in them that make them good, kind people, but also enforce some, boundaries. So it might have like different verbiage now and everything, but I think, she was kind of talking about all of the obstacles that we face as modern women, where it's like the bamboo ceiling and it's positive parenting and trying to manage our health during a pandemic, both physically and mentally. It's really challenging. So I think she just really hit on a lot of different, very relevant pain points for people in our age group and particularly Asian American women, where we are kind of, and also taking care of our parents too, because her mother also had a breast cancer scare. And so, it was really tough it's tough for all of us to really process all of this. And I think she was just very real and raw about it. And I think that's such a, like, it's a rare quality these days in the world of like hyper edited everything. I think people just responded really well to Kim and, her story.
I love that you're sharing that because I always ask this question every time I do one of these lives with, a podcast, an owner of a podcast. And everyone always says basically the same thing. And what I'm ultimately hearing is authenticity and vulnerability. Like those episodes, like they hit, like, and it just, to me, my takeaway from that is that that is what we are all seeking. That is what we are all drawn to. That is what leads to magic, connection, abundance. That is what leads to all the things that we're all seeking. And so like when we see that, when we hear that, when we feel that in others, we gravitate towards that. And so that's such a huge takeaway, reminder and lesson, even for me, my own clients, about like how just continue to show up in your authenticity, continue to push yourself, to push those edges of vulnerability, because that's really where the magic is. That's where, people want to see that, people are drawn to that. And that's where the abundance really, does want to flow. It wants to flow towards that. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I think we spend a lot of our, adolescence and even adult lives like figuring out how to fit in and how to impress people and all that stuff. And you can certainly get to a certain status in life doing that. But that's how you end up like I was, where you're just like, okay, I'm here now. Why does it feel so empty? And it's because you just need to take a step back and realize, okay, what's important to me? What are my core values? What makes me feel like fulfilled inside? And it might be a little bit different than what you thought it was. So I think that's a really great lesson for all of us. And like, I'm going to be real, like, I'm still learning that. I'm still very much on my journey. I'm not going to claim I have it all figured out. That's definitely not the case. And I don't think anyone does. No one has it all figured out. And I think that should give us some comfort, actually. Like,
Yeah,
everyone's going through something.
exactly right. Like, it's almost like, oh my God, that should actually make you feel relieved. It's like, oh my God, thank God no one's got it figured out. Like,
Yeah.
phew, like here I was thinking, just relieved so much pressure on us. It's like, yeah, we're all just trying to figure it out. And like, that is actually so much of the purpose and the meaning of life, is to walk each other home and to hold that space for each other, so that we can continue to shed the parts of us that aren't who we are, so that we can continue to discover who we're supposed to be. It's like, just this whole journey is about becoming, and so
Yeah.
I feel like
Yeah.
I could totally go off on a tangent and a rabbit hole on that, but yes, exactly. So thank you for sharing that, because I hear you on that. It's like, oh, isn't that a relief that like,
Yeah.
it's actually like bullshit to think that like anyone has figured it out. If anyone's claiming that, it's like, yeah, I don't trust that person.
Right, exactly. Something I was thinking about the other day was like, is it better to be at the peak of the mountain or in the valley, right? Because sometimes we all feel like we're in the valley, we want to get to the peak, but sometimes I think it's really lonely at the peak. Yeah, for me, I feel like my like sweet spot is just climbing the mountain, right? Like just knowing like I'm on the mountain, I am climbing, and then just like literally take a moment and look around and be like, this is beautiful. Or maybe there's a storm here and it's really kind of crazy right now, but just kind of like taking in the moment. Meditations really helped me with that too. In the podcast, we also talk about, you said invest in yourself and really being present. And we can't say that enough, because like it's really hard. It's really hard, and that's why we can't say it enough, but it will really help root us to being present and cultivating gratitude and abundance.
Love it. Brian's like, this is uncanny, one of us. Isn't that what I said? I love it. Victoria's watching too. Victoria's like, Lillian's my mom. Vanessa was like, so who like is your client? And I was like, they're you and you are them. I was like, one of us, they're one of you. And she was like, okay. So I love this, because Brian's like, this is uncanny, one of us. I love it. It's so true. And and I feel like I want to just like pause right there. I want to like capture that. I want to end on that note, because what you just said was so gorgeous, because about the mountain, because you were like the valley or the peak. And I think exactly like you said, we often think that, the peak is the goal, it's the destination. Like we all think that we need to like get there, we need to find the thing, we need to achieve the thing. Like once we get there, like you said, once I become director by 30, which as soon as you said that, I'm like, oh my God, you remind me of my girl Shay, who's inside this container. Like that's her thing, like director by whatever. And she's also in marketing too. So I was like, oh my God, I hope she watches this later, because this is so on point. But yeah, we all think like that mountain, that top, but like you literally can just visualize it, and it's like, wow, like it is kind of lonely there. And I love what you said about like, where I would rather be is like on the mountain in the journey, like looking around. And I got chills as soon as I said that. I was like, oh my God, that is like so gorgeous, like I could cry.
Oh.
That really is exactly it, right? We always talk about like, it's about the journey, not the destination. We hear about these things all
Yeah.
the time, but like, I just love that. I love that analogy. I don't know why I haven't heard it before. I don't know if you've ever used it before, if you heard it somewhere else, but I just,
No, yeah, I journaled about it, but I like never talked about it publicly. I was having like a really low day, and I just felt like I was in the valley, and I was just like kind of really meditating on like, okay, I'm in this valley, like what does it feel like? And I was like, well, do I really want to be on that peak? And then I thought, okay, I remember actually what it feels like to be on that peak. And I was like, it's not what you think it is.
oh.
And that was really helpful for me.
Oh my gosh, that is seriously, I'm like, my eyes are literally like the onions. We like to call it the onions. The onions are out, I just love that, because like, wow, like I'm gonna remember that visual. I mean, like who isn't a visual learner? Like I'm so gonna remember that visual like forever, because it really is like, that's where it is. Like, and also it actually reminds me of the most epic hike I've ever done in my life was in Switzerland. I didn't know that it was gonna be the most epic hike. I know, like in Switzerland. But like I didn't know that it was gonna be like this crazy epic hike, right? Like
Yeah.
I wasn't even planning on hiking when I was there, but I was there for this thing and then someone invited me and whatever. So, but every time, like there was the craziest hike I've ever done. And that view at the time, it was like the most majestic. It was like the most absurd thing. Like, oh my God, we finally fucking got there. Like it took hours, But whenever I think back to that hike, I actually have to like go out of my way to think about that moment at the top and what that looked like. That's
Mhm.
actually not what I remember about that hike. So what I remember about that hike was every time we went up like a new field of flowers, or like the jagged like rocky part that I had to like scale,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
or like when my ankle was like, oh my God, am I gonna like fucking like break my ankle right now? Like this is so deep. Like those are all the things that are memorable and that were meaningful and that I remember. I literally remember like thinking like, holy shit, this looks like a fucking Ricola commercial. Like this is mad. Like that's what I remember. I hardly even remember like the peak. Like
Yeah.
I wish I took more pictures along the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
And
think
we
about that.
can think thanks to modern technology, but also just taking pictures mentally, right? Like not just with our eyes, like, smelling, hearing, like touching. I think the five senses are like underrated. Like we need to use them more often. And that really helps like ground us to the moment because like I've also suffered from like anxiety attacks and like that's always really helped. If in the moment I'm like, oh my God, I'm panicking right now. And then I just try to like literally slow things down and focus with all five senses. Like, what am I hearing right now? What am I seeing, smelling? And then I realize, okay, like I'm okay. Like I'm alive in this moment and the world is still, it's going on and it's doing its thing.
Yeah, I love it. Wow. Thank you so much, Vanessa. Like I just feel like that was like a huge mic drop for you. And I feel like we can wrap this up now with like so much contentment and peace.
Oh, yeah, I know. No, thank you so much. This was so much fun. And yeah, like I think we really connected. We're on the same wavelength. And I really love that you're also facilitating this amazing healing space and journey for your community. It's so important. And there's not enough of us in the world. And so I feel like the more we can kind of bring into this conversation, the more we can impact.
For sure. I love it. Vanessa, it's such a pleasure, to just connect with you again and to be able to like, be reverse,
I
and
know it's like weird. I'm in the hot seat now. It's not easy, but definitely appreciate the opportunity. So thank you.
absolutely. Is there anything in particular aside from your podcast that you would either like to promote or that you would like us to support you in? How can we support you? How can we continue to, build with you and stay connected?
Yeah. No, I think mainly the podcast. If you like it, subscribe, download. You can leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. You can donate at Ko-fi. There's tons of ways that you can help support us. Tell your friends and family. It's mainly just kind of spreading the word and getting more people aware of Thrive Spice. And, we'd love to hear from you. If there are certain people that you think would be great for the podcast or you want to hear about certain topics, let me know. Join the community and thank you so much.
Yeah, I love it. Oh my gosh, Vanessa, it's been such a pleasure. We're going to go ahead and sign off here, but thank you so much for jumping on. It's been a minute since we had I call these Wednesday wisdom sessions. So I'm
Ooh, I like it.
love it. Thank you so much for joining us.